A realtor is facing a capital murder charge for a 2012 murder in Arlington. Hello, everybody. I'm Heather Hayes.
I'm Steve Eager. It's 9 o'clock. 42-year-old Mayra Velasquez is in jail right now. This arrest comes 14 years after 33-year-old Irasema Chavez was found stabbed roughly 100 times in her home. Fox 4's Peyton Yeager has more on how investigators got the break in the case. Peyton.
Steve, and this arrest comes after a nearly 2-year partnership between Arlington police and the FBI. Back in November of 2024, Arlington police went to the FBI about its specific genetic program. The FBI agreed and got to work, and it led to a breakthrough in this case earlier this year. Monday.
Good morning, and thank you for being here. I'm Al Jones. I'm the Chief of Police for the City of Arlington. I am grateful to stand here with our partners from the FBI to share that by working together, we made an arrest on a 14-year-old murder case. You may recall 2 years ago, I stood here and told you about a cold case we solved with the help of FBI and their investigative genetic genealogy team.
For 14 years, Arlington detectives had blood from an unidentified woman inside Irasema Chavez's apartment, but no name to attach to it. The sample they collected from the scene did not match anyone in the law enforcement databases available in 2012. A later DNA-generated portrait suggested what the woman might look like, but it still did not identify her. The case remained open until Arlington police asked the FBI Dallas field office to examine the profile through investigative genetic genealogy. The genealogy work produced a family lead. Detectives later collected several items discarded by 42-year-old Mayra Velasquez, including 2 plastic forks, a plate, and a cup. Police say DNA recovered from one of the forks matched the crime scene blood. In July 2026, Velasquez was arrested and charged with capital murder in connection with Irasema's death. The arrest answered one question that had followed the investigation for years: whose blood had been found in the apartment? It did not answer everything else. Police have not identified Velasquez as the hooded person recorded outside Irasema's home. They have not announced a motive. They have not publicly disclosed what their cell phone evidence shows, and although investigators say they are not looking for another suspect, the complete case has not yet been presented in court. Velasquez has been accused, not convicted. This account separates what Arlington police and the FBI confirmed during their July 22nd briefing from allegations contained in court records and questions that remain unresolved. Before returning to 2012, subscribe to Radius of Crime for more cold cases where preserved evidence gives investigators a new path to the truth. At approximately 8:51 on the morning of January 20th, 2012, Arlington officers were called to the Aspenwood Apartments in the 2700 block of South Collins Street. A member of Irasema Chavez's family had gone to check on her and found her unresponsive inside apartment 416. Irasema was pronounced dead at the scene. The Arlington Police Department's official cold case record lists her as 32 years old and states that she died from multiple stab wounds. Medical examiner reporting placed the fatal attack in the kitchen. Coverage of the 2026 briefing said she had been stabbed more than 100 times. The exact number does not explain the killing, but it shows the level of violence detectives encountered when they entered the apartment. By then, whoever was responsible had left. Investigators secured the home and began documenting the scene. They photographed blood, examined possible fingerprints, noted disturbed property, and collected anything that might help establish who had been inside during Irasema's final hours. Public records reveal far less about Irasema's life than they do about her death. Some court and medical documents use the name Irasema Chavez Sanchez, while Arlington police identifies her as Irasema Chavez. Her family's actions that morning provide one of the few personal details consistently preserved in the public account. They noticed something was wrong, went looking for her, and found the crime before more time had passed. Detectives also had video from a surveillance camera outside the apartment. At about 11:30 the previous night, the system recorded a hooded person climbing the stairs toward Irasema's door. The visitor wore loose clothing that concealed much of the body and face. After reaching the apartment, the person knocked and waited for more than a minute. Someone eventually opened the door. The recording appeared to show a brief exchange before the visitor was allowed inside. There was no visible struggle at the entrance. When Arlington police released the footage in August 2012, early news coverage described the visitor as appearing to be a man. More recent police and news accounts have used the neutral word person. The recording was too distant to settle the visitor's sex or identity. The hood obscured the head and face, the loose clothing hid the person's shape, and the camera never obtained a clear frontal view. The footage established that someone had been admitted shortly before Irasema was found dead. It did not establish who opened the door, whether Irasema recognized the visitor, how long the person remained inside, or whether that individual was responsible for the killing. No obvious signs of forced entry were found. This was consistent with the video, but it did not prove Irasema knew the attacker. It showed only that detectives found no clear evidence that someone had broken into the apartment. Police circulated the footage and asked the public to identify the visitor. No reliable identification followed. The image would remain one of the case's most recognizable pieces of evidence, but it never gave detectives a name. The crime scene provided something more precise. While processing the apartment, investigators collected a small droplet of fresh blood from a television stand in Irasema's bedroom. Police said the television itself had been stolen. Laboratory testing determined that the blood did not belong to Irasema. The resulting profile was described by police as belonging to an unknown Hispanic woman. Detectives uploaded the profile to the Combined DNA Index System, commonly known as CODIS. There was no match. The blood could identify its contributor if detectives eventually obtained the correct comparison sample. Until then, it could not explain who the woman was, when she had been inside the apartment, or how her blood came to be on the television stand. Police developed a theory that the person who attacked Irasema may have cut herself during the stabbing. The belief that the attacker cut herself is an investigative interpretation, not a fact established by a jury. The location and condition of the blood may support the theory, particularly because police described it as fresh and found it during the homicide investigation. But prosecutors will still have to connect the sample to the attack rather than simply prove that its contributor had once been inside the apartment. The stolen television added another piece to the scene. It may help explain why Velasquez was charged with capital murder rather than a lesser homicide offense, because Texas law can treat a killing committed during certain other felonies as capital murder. However, officials did not use the July 22nd briefing to give a complete legal explanation of the charge. Until formal charging documents clearly identify the qualifying circumstance, the missing television should not be presented as proof that robbery was the prosecution's final theory. In the first months of the investigation, detectives interviewed Irasema's relatives, neighbors, friends, and other people connected to her life. The 2026 briefing added an important fact that had not been widely known when the case was first reported. Police said Mayra Velasquez was interviewed during the original investigation. Officials also said Velasquez and Irasema had been close friends and that Velasquez lived only a few miles from the crime scene. Being interviewed did not make Velasquez a suspect, and friendship did not establish guilt. At the time, investigators could not connect her to the homicide. The surveillance image was too unclear to identify its subject. The blood profile did not match anyone in CODIS. Witness information did not provide enough evidence for an arrest. Police continued following leads, but the case moved into years without a confirmed suspect. The preserved evidence still had value. The blood profile remained in the case file and could be searched again as databases expanded. The original surveillance recording could be reviewed as investigators developed new names. Interviews conducted in 2012 preserved what witnesses remembered before more time passed. Cold case investigations often depend on that combination: evidence collected correctly at the beginning and a later method capable of extracting information that was not available at the time. Here, the most important evidence was not newly discovered in 2026. It had been inside the apartment from the first morning. What changed was the route investigators could use to reach the person who left it. Velasquez's 2012 interview changes how the later DNA development is understood. Genetic genealogy did not introduce a completely unknown person into the case. It directed detectives back towards someone who had already been part of Irasema's circle, but whom they had been unable to connect to the physical evidence. Preserving the blood was therefore crucial. Interviews and relationships could raise questions, but they could not replace a direct forensic comparison. In 2016, Arlington police sent the unknown profile to Parabon Nanolabs. The company used DNA phenotyping to predict physical traits associated with the contributor. The analysis suggested a woman of Latino ancestry with brown eyes and long brown hair. Parabon created a computer-generated composite based on those predictions. The image was not a photograph reconstructed from DNA. It could not produce an exact face, determine how the woman wore her hair in 2012, or identify one person from a community. It offered a statistical estimate of visible traits that might help detectives review possible names or encourage someone to recognize a resemblance. The composite also drew attention to a conflict between the two main clues. Early coverage had described the hooded visitor as appearing male. The crime scene blood belonged to a woman. Those facts did not prove the video had been interpreted incorrectly. They also did not prove that the visitor and the person who left the blood were different people. The clothing in the footage concealed the visitor's body, and the camera provided no clear face. The DNA suggested traits but not an identity. Police released the composite and continued asking for information. No direct comparison followed. For years, detectives had a profile detailed enough to predict ancestry, eye color, and hair color, yet still could not attach it to a person. By November 2024, Arlington's homicide unit brought the case to the FBI Dallas field office. The question was whether investigative genetic genealogy could succeed where a conventional database search had failed. CODIS searches for a direct forensic match among profiles already contained in the law enforcement system. Investigative genetic genealogy follows a different route. The FBI works with DNA databases that permit law enforcement use and looks for people who share genetic material with the unknown contributor. Those people may be close relatives, but they may also be distant cousins who have no knowledge of the crime or of the person investigators are seeking. A match to a relative does not identify a suspect by itself. Genealogists have to determine how the matching people are related, build family trees, and examine multiple branches. Investigators then compare the people in those branches with the known facts of the case, including sex, age, geography, timing, and any connection to the victim. During the July briefing, FBI Dallas Special Agent in Charge, R. Joseph Rothrock, explained that the family research creates possible leads. Investigators examine those leads against witness information, location, and the timing of the crime. Only after that work do detectives seek DNA directly from the potential suspect for comparison with the crime scene profile. The FBI said it has used investigative genetic genealogy in nearly 250 cases across 30 states since 2018. The distinction between these methods helps explain both the power and the limits of genetic genealogy. It is also different from the Parabon work completed in 2016. DNA phenotyping examined genetic markers to estimate visible traits. It tried to answer what the unknown contributor might look like. Investigative genetic genealogy asked a different question: who might be related to the person who left the blood? One process produced a predicted appearance. The other produced family connections that could be checked against records and the known facts of the homicide. Neither method proved who killed Irasema. The value came from combining the genealogy lead with the original investigation. Detectives could ask whether a person in the family tree was the right age in 2012, lived close enough to Arlington, knew Irasema, or had previously appeared in the case file. A person could fit one factor and still be eliminated by another. A relative who lived in another state might help build the tree but have no connection to the crime. Someone who lived nearby might be excluded by sex, age, or the direct DNA comparison. The final step had to move away from family inference and back to forensic evidence collected from the person detectives were investigating. Genetic genealogy can turn an unknown profile into a list of possible relatives. It cannot determine who committed a murder. Police still have to investigate, eliminate people, and obtain evidence that can stand on its own in court. In Irasema's case, the FBI's work first established a genetic connection within Velasquez's family line. Officials did not publicly identify the relative or describe how closely that person was related to Velasquez. The family tree work narrowed the possibilities, and in April 2026, the FBI notified Arlington detectives that Velasquez was a potential suspect. The lead was especially significant because detectives already knew she had been close to Irasema and had interviewed her in 2012. It was still only a lead. The DNA found in the apartment had not yet been compared directly with DNA known to have come from Velasquez. Detectives began working to obtain that comparison without asking her to volunteer a sample. In May 2026, officers followed Velasquez to a restaurant. After she finished eating and left, detectives collected several discarded items from the table: 2 plastic forks, a plate, and a cup. A laboratory tested the recovered material against the blood droplet preserved from Irasema's bedroom. Police say DNA from one of the forks matched the crime scene profile. The family tree research had pointed toward Velasquez, while the matching fork allegedly provided DNA from Velasquez herself. Genetic genealogy therefore served as a filter, not the final identification. The direct comparison came from one of the 2 recovered forks. Detectives also said they developed cell phone evidence that they consider valuable to the case. They did not reveal the contents of that evidence. The briefing did not say whether it involved call records, messages, location information, or another type of data. None of those possibilities should be assumed. At trial, prosecutors may explain how the cell phone evidence relates to Irasema, Velasquez, the night of the killing, or the years that followed. Until then, it is accurate only to say that police reported having cell phone data they expect to use in court. Investigators presented the DNA result and their other evidence to obtain an arrest warrant. Velasquez was taken into custody in July 2026 and booked into the Tarrant County Jail on July 17th. Court and jail records list the charge as capital murder. Velasquez was reported to be held without bond, and attorney Vincent Carrizales was identified as representing her. She has not been convicted. The courtroom dispute will center on how several pieces of evidence fit together rather than on the DNA result alone. Police say the blood on the television stand matched DNA recovered from one of the discarded forks. Because Velasquez and Irasema were close friends, evidence that Velasquez had visited the apartment at some point would not automatically connect her to the killing. The timing and condition of the blood are therefore crucial. Investigators describe it as fresh and believe the attacker may have cut herself during the stabbing, but that remains their interpretation of the scene. The stolen television may also matter. The blood was found on the stand where the television had been located, creating a possible link between the contributor and the removal of property. Officials, however, have not publicly identified the qualifying circumstance behind the capital murder charge. Unless formal court documents establish robbery or another felony as the state's theory, the missing television should not be treated as a complete legal explanation. The surveillance footage remains separate from the DNA evidence. It shows a hooded person entering the apartment, but it does not provide a clear face, and police have not identified Velasquez as that visitor. Detectives have also referred to cell phone evidence they consider valuable. They have not disclosed what it contains, so it cannot yet be used publicly to place Velasquez at the apartment, explain the visitor's identity, or establish a motive. Police say they are not looking for another suspect, which shows where the investigation is currently focused. It does not prove that Velasquez acted alone, and it does not resolve the unanswered questions in the video. The motive remains unclear. The friendship between the women provides context, but it does not explain why Irasema was attacked. Rumors or tips involving jealousy remain unproven and should not be presented as the reason for the killing. Taken together, the evidence gives prosecutors a possible sequence. A person known to Irasema entered without force, blood from another woman was left near stolen property, genetic genealogy produced a family lead, and a discarded fork allegedly supplied a direct DNA match. The defense will be able to challenge the timing of the blood, the handling and testing of both samples, the interpretation of the television evidence, and whether the state can connect Velasquez to the homicide rather than simply to Irasema's home. Arlington Police Chief Alexander Jones said the investigation is not finished and asked anyone with additional information to contact the department. Detective Tracy Dixon became emotional when discussing the moment investigators told Irasema's family that an arrest had been made. She described that conversation as the reason people involved in cold case work continue pursuing cases over many years. For Irasema's family, the arrest ends one period of waiting and begins another. For more than a decade, there was no person charged in her death. Now there is an accused woman, a reported DNA match, a stolen television, undisclosed cell phone evidence, and a history between the two women that detectives knew about from the original investigation. There are also limits to what the public currently knows. No motive has been established. The hooded visitor has not been officially identified as Velasquez. Police have not publicly said whether the murder weapon was recovered. The detailed cell phone evidence has not been released. The precise qualifying felony behind the capital murder charge has not been clearly explained in formal public documents, and the evidence has not been tested before a jury. Those gaps do not cancel the importance of the DNA breakthrough. They define the questions the prosecution must answer. In 2012, detectives had an unclear image and blood from an unidentified woman. In 2016, DNA phenotyping produced an estimated appearance but no name. In 2024, Arlington police brought the profile to the FBI. The genealogy team traced genetic relationships and built a family lead. In April 2026, that work pointed detectives toward Mayra Velasquez. In May, detectives recovered 2 plastic forks, a plate and a cup. Police say DNA from one of the forks matched the blood from Irasema's bedroom. In July, Velasquez was charged with capital murder. The progression from blood droplet to family tree to matching fork explains how an old sample produced an arrest 14 years later. It does not decide the case. Mayra Velasquez is presumed innocent unless prosecutors prove the charge beyond a reasonable doubt. The court must now determine whether the woman whose DNA police say matched the blood is legally responsible for Irasema Chavez's murder. Share your thoughts on the case in the comments and tell us where you are watching from. Subscribe to Radius of Crime for more cold cases where preserved evidence gives investigators a new path to the truth.